one or two?
Oh, it sounds like two.
Two, yeah.
It's working.
It may be a little hot, but
Yeah, I can turn it down.
okay. No, you're lighting it up. Nice, that's great. Aw.
We know you like your warm milk.
Oh, I really
I
do.
know. The clock has gone missing, so we're in a timeless space this evening.
Yeah.
Yeah, a couple minutes to wrap up right here.
Great. I should say this is the first time that that blanket has suggested itself as a good idea. It's been kind of cold, actually. Yeah, but I would, yeah, I would consider wrapping it around. But no, I don't think I'm going to do it. But it has been cold enough.
Yeah, it's a little cold.
When I was at Tassajara in the winter, I've probably said this. It was on a few occasions, it was down to 22, 24 degrees Fahrenheit, right? Basically. So, kind of below zero. And the at that point, the heat in the zendo didn't work very well when when it was really, really cold. And so you just get up and put on some long underwear and then as many robes as you had, like maybe an extra kimono or some other stuff like that, and it was still really, really cold. You get good at like wrapping the sleeves of your robe over your knees so your knees aren't cold, and then wrapping them around your hands and tucking your hands together and stuff like that. But I could have used a blanket. So
Yeah, it's definitely a good time to have some extra blankets.
Exactly. I suspect they still don't have blankets. But nowadays you can wear a hat in the sendo. At the time you couldn't wear a hat, so
Yeah, that makes a difference.
it definitely does. Yeah, if you're just sitting, not doing anything, you're just radiating heat out the top of your head like nobody's business. So, yeah. Well, you're in a classroom during the day, right? Is there heat good, or has it been cold in that too?
It's usually pretty cold.
Yeah.
And they have there's not cool air pushing through all the time.
No.
So, yeah, I usually wear my coat during the day.
Ah. Well, I thought we could talk about breathing a bit. Take whatever posture works and it feels comfortable and sustainable, and then it can help to kind of attend to your hara, so your lower stomach muscles and sort of perineal muscles, and this sort of chamber sort of in the down at the bottom of your diaphragm, basically. So just to in yoga, there are these locks, right? And if you can think of it that way, but basically, if you just bring a little bit of tension. Oh, come on in. Yeah, no problem. Oh, wait. Great. Well, so I was just talking about breathing a bit. So if you bring a little bit of tension to your lower abdominal muscles and maybe your kind of pelvic floor, what you might notice is you can put your hand on at your sternum or right over your solar plexus. You can, if you bring some tension to your hara, ideally what happens is your solar plexus and the muscles above around your sternum or below your sternum kind of flatten out, and what you end up with is this kind of it's like a cantaloupe sized, or maybe cantaloupe sized, sort of rounding in your lower abdomen, right? And in a little bit more detail, the thing that happens when you do that is your navel kind of points up at the sky in this odd way, right? But anyway, great. Let's see. Great. So I was just talking about breath. So again, we might practice this. So place your right hand right over your solar plexus, and your left hand kind of right over your navel, right? So try this, like just relax and flatten out the muscles over your solar plexus so that you've got this flat plane down here, and kind of bring some tension to your lower abdominal muscles and your perineal muscles. You can feel it. There's this flat surface and then this sort of roundness, right? And now let's try that with the breath. So you flatten out your solar plexus, you tighten gently your lower abdominal muscles and your perineal muscles, and then let the breath collapse out of the body. If you also use your yogic throat lock, it sounds like this. Right? It's like, and pause. And then you can let go of the tension in your abdomen, but just still keep your attention there. Keep your awareness there, and let the breath come in. So it's notice that the in breath is usually quite a bit shorter, right, than the out breath. So try again. So that's the kind of most exaggerated version of the breathing. That's kind of at the heart of Zazen practice. The reason why I'm saying it's exaggerated is that nobody is sitting there going, okay, really tighten up those abdominal muscles and breathe out now, now relax it. It's not that much like calisthenics, right? But there is this awareness and this kind of subtle emphasis on the out breath. That's the nature of breathing in Zazen. So it would be great to kind of work with that. Maybe when we start, do about 5 really long concerted breaths where you really, really empty your lungs, and it feels like essentially there's a stone that starts in your chest and falls through your sort of flat solar plexus and into your aura and presses your breath out. And then at the bottom, there's this pause where almost nothing is happening. And then on the in-breath, it feels like the breath floods up out of the heart and fills the body relatively quickly, at least relative to the out-breath. And there's no tension, nothing standing in the way. And then, so when we start, do maybe 4 or 5 of those. And then let the breath settle into its natural rhythm and stuff, but really keep your attention here in your hara and keep a little bit of emphasis on the out breath, just a subtle emphasis, and let that subtle emphasis be as subtle as you can possibly manage it. And see what happens when you breathe like that. I mean, it actually has a pretty powerful effect on your posture overall. If you really keep your awareness down here and keep that emphasis on the out breath, it tends to kind of pull tension out of the upper body and into the hara and dissipate it on every breath. So try that too, and see how that works. So let's get started. If you're sitting with your eyes open, what I've noticed for me is that if you breathe in this concerted way as the breath falls out of the body, there's a temptation to sort of narrow the gaze and allow the eyes to close a little bit more. And oddly, when the breath starts to come back in, it can feel natural to open the eyes more. If you're sitting with your eyes closed, obviously it doesn't matter. But if you're sitting with your eyes open, I would say don't struggle with that, but try and decouple the gaze from the breath. The gaze should stay relaxed and wide and receptive. And finally, notice the pause near the bottom of the breath when you're breathed almost all the way out. And finally, when the breath leaves the body completely. And there's a kind of an invitation there to rest and to let go of preoccupation and agency, I guess, and just rest there. It doesn't last very long, and it doesn't have to last very long. Just to notice it, just to sense the invitation to the extent that it's possible in that moment, just to let go of everything and rest there. And then as the diaphragm says up, time to breathe in, just let go and trust the next breath. Notice that in some ways it's the subtle emphasis on the out breath that brings that focus. And it's the letting go that allows it to open up into everything. So maybe we should stretch a teensy bit here. Why don't you, if you're sitting on the mat, why don't you remove the cushion and kind of do child's pose. Like sitting in a chair, I think you can just bend over your knees, right? But use it as a way of softening the lower back, relaxing the muscles in the upper back. And you come back up. And then grab your right knee, put your left hand around behind your back, twist. Look over your left shoulder. A few breaths here. And then unwrap around the other side. Put your left hand on your right knee, right hand around behind your back, and twist. Back over your right shoulder. And release. Maybe one more thing. So this is a little bit tricky for some people. In particular, it's tricky for me, but it can help to limber up your neck a little bit. So roll your head to the right and down. You don't have to be too extreme about it. And up. And then you don't have to roll your head back. That's not really necessary. Just let it, move over to the right shoulder again and down. You don't want to be overstretching your neck after sitting. Over to the right, down, very gentle, unathletic movement. And then pause, and then just do it the other direction. So roll your head over the left. You might expect this is going to feel different, and generally it does. Cross the front to the right. And back up without kinking the neck on that return. Over to the right and up. Maybe one more time. Great. What time is it? Well, first of all, that was great. Thanks for sitting. Might as well get comfortable. I wonder if anybody has any questions about anything we just did, about Zazen practice in general, about Zen practice in general. And really, any questions at all? Cool. Well, so I've already talked about this guy some, but the guy that brought this particular style of Zen practice to Japan was essentially born in 1200 and lived till maybe it's the late 1240s, right? And he had a very complicated life, but he did a lot in it. He was sent off to a Tendai Buddhist monastery at a fairly early age, and after being pretty lavishly educated at the court, and after being demonstrated to be smart and inquisitive and arrogant and pushy. And so he, after a while, the people at the Tendai monastery, after he got ordained, they're like, you should really study with this other guy who had just been studying a slightly different Zen school in China. And so Dogen went to study with him, and they went off to China. Dogen went around China and eventually met this teacher named Tiantong Lujing, who turned out to be pretty great. And they really clicked, and Dogen's practice really flourished under Rujing. And so after about 5 years in China, he went back, and among other things. So it turns out a while ago, there was a translation made of that included, among other things, the private talk that Rujing gave to him on his eve of his departure back to Japan. And he says all these wild things like, don't spend too much time in the marketplace where looking at the, and looking and listening to the animals and people and so on and so forth. And then he says, and never look at large fish. And he says a bunch of other really crazy stuff like that. And I remember my teacher, after this translation came out, he gave a talk about it, and he mentioned the large fish thing, and it really stuck with me. And the kind of pinnacle of my obsession with large fish in Zen is that I essentially had a full body hallucination while sitting of being swallowed by a giant fish. So a very, very large fish. But anyway, so he went back to Japan, and he was all fired up about Zen practice, and he waltzed into Kyoto and into the monastery or the temple that he used to live in, the Tendai temple. And everybody was like, what are you talking about? We don't need to, do any of that Zen stuff. And so they kind of ran him out of town, basically. And he was living out in a country temple as a semi-abandoned country temple as a guest, and he decided he needed a manifesto. So he wrote this manifesto, and I'm going to read the first few paragraphs of it because there's an interesting phrase in it that's worth looking at. Come on. Is that it? Yeah. This is Kaz Danahashi's translation, and the thing is called the Bendowa, which is variously translated, but Kaz translates it as on the endeavor of the way. The other usual translation is something like the wholehearted way. But he says this. He says, all Buddhas who individually transmit inconceivable dharma, actualizing unsurpassable complete enlightenment, have a wondrous art, supreme and unconditioned. Receptive samadhi is its mark. Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit more, but that's the part I wanted to get to. The thing that Kaz Tanahashi translates as receptive samadhi is a complicated phrase in Japanese that I don't know if Dogen made it up or whether he learned it in China, but it's Jiyu Zanmai, and it means, well, okay, so the characters are self, receive, use, and Zanmai is a cognate for samadhi, which is to say meditative concentration, right? And so Kaz translates it as receptive samadhi. It's often translated as self-receiving and employing or using samadhi, right? So it's the idea is that you receive the self, and the self receives the self and employs the agency of the self in the context of meditative concentration, right? Something like that. So I'll read a little bit more, and then I'll talk about this thing that I just discovered recently that's kind of interesting and bears on what we're talking about and bears on what we were doing when we were sitting. So receptive samadhi is its mark. Only Buddhas transmit it to Buddhas without veering off. Sitting upright, practicing Zazen, is the authentic gate to free yourself in the unconfined realm of this samadhi. Okay. And then he says this other thing, which is related. Although this inconceivable dharma is abundant in each person, it is not actualized without practice, and it's not experienced without realization. When you release it, it fills your hand. How could it be limited to one or many? When you speak it, it fills your mouth. It's not bounded by length or width. So the thing I just found out the other day that no one, as far as I know, as I can remember, has mentioned this when they're talking about this particular thing. I mean, this is, you can see that he thinks this is really important. Where does he say this? No, he's getting into his biography. Anyway, it's some allure a little bit later in the document. He says it's the unsurpassable of the unsurpassable. So it's the like the supreme heart of this practice that's designed to free people from suffering, right? So Jiyu Zanmai, right? It's what? Yeah, 5 characters, right? But if you look it up in a Chinese dictionary, particularly a dictionary that has kind of classical Chinese in it, this weird thing jumps out, which is that, so Ji is the Japanese pronunciation of the character that means the self, right? And Jiyu is the Japanese pronunciation for these 2 characters that, as I said before, if they're separated, they mean receive and use. But they actually constitute a compound as well. And the compound means enjoy or appreciate. And it's not a compound exactly like that in Japanese, as far as I can tell, but it can mean accept, right? So all of those things, right? So in other words, what he's saying right up front, the central point, right? He has to have been aware. He spent the previous 5 years speaking Chinese. He has to have been aware that this was true, right? About the language and about the thing that he's saying, right? And probably he said it because his teacher told him, right? But in any case, it seems clear that what he's saying is when we, everybody has this potential to enjoy the unfolding of the self and the activity of being alive, right? From sitting, standing, lying down, walking around, etc. Right? But he says it's not actualized without practice, because in fact our default is to not really enjoy life so much. Right? That's the first noble truth, right? The Buddha said when he, for the first time, he sat down and talked with anybody after he woke up, and he was talking to, like his former colleagues in the ascetic practices business, and they kind of thought he was a loser because he stopped doing ascetic practices, and so he had to kind of be convincing. And the very first thing he says is, life is suffering or discontent or unsatisfactory, right? So Dogen is saying that unsatisfactory flavor that life has is an unnecessary delusion, and that it can be, if you realize it through practice, the enjoyment and appreciation of exactly the activity of living in this everyday way is boundless, right? Amazing. And he says, until you realize this, until you get it at least once, and until you see how it works, right? You can't put it into practice in your life, right? So that's what Zazen is for. He says, self-enjoying samadhi is the mark of practice, and its technique is sitting upright and practicing. The technique that supports it is sitting upright and practicing zazen. That's what he says. That's amazing, right? And a little bit more detail. I mean, what we were doing while we were sitting, right, is one of the gateways to this recognition is the breath. It's not the only one, and some people find it useful, and some people don't find it so useful. I think I've said this before, but the famous composer John Cage, who was also a Zen practitioner, somebody once asked him about Zen meditation, and he goes, what works for me? He says, I've tried it all. What works for me is I listen to one thing completely, right? Good for John Cage, but for some people, the breath is good, right? And the breathing that we were doing, the slightly emphasized out breath, the kind of energy and attention given to the hara, and so on and so forth, and in particular to this pause that happens at the bottom of the breath, that's an invitation exactly to what Dogen is talking about, right? There's this way in which, if you really attend to what's going on anytime in your body and mind, but certainly in that moment when it's possible, relatively possible to let go of all preoccupations and just pay attention, right? You notice the arising of the sensations in the body, and then the the broader sensorium, and then you notice the way in which your body is constantly alive and active, right? Constantly helping itself straighten up and be comfortable, right? And be, and sit, basically sit in this posture. And that can be it's possible to experience that as problematic, right? If you're uncomfortable or not sure you're doing it right or whatever, right? But in fact, just that the arising of sensations and perceptions, the exercise of subtle agency to keep the body upright and comfortable, right? It's a miracle, right? It's the miracle that gives rise, in some, most likely, to the kind of sentience, self-awareness, subjectivity that allows this practice to work in the first place, right? And also the subjectivity that makes it necessary, because otherwise we can be deluding ourselves into being unsatisfied, right? So just to use that kind of self-study and that whatever anchors work for you, the breath, the being open to the sensations, that maybe, pick a sense door. Maybe today it's hearing, right? Listen to one thing completely. And notice the way in which that enjoyment and appreciation arises naturally, without being forced, without being asked, right? In the moment when we let go, and maybe in some moments surrounding when we let go. And then the next, since Zen practice is intended to bring minds into the world that live and work comfortably and skillfully with the human condition, right? To bring that along in your everyday life, and notice how that awareness can act as a container for the everyday activity of speaking, wanting, planning, et cetera, and make it also an occasion for appreciation and delight, and some humor. Look at that! Here I go, et cetera. Right. So, any questions about that? That's about all I had to say. Go ahead.
Receiving the self, is there a next place to go with receiving self?
Well, that's a great question. So what Dogen says, and this is probably his most quoted 3 or 4 sentences. He says, to study the way is to study the self, right? So that's self-receiving, right? To study the self is to forget the self. And to forget the self is to be awakened by everything, right? Every single thing. Right? And he also says, when you go forward and you confirm the things of the world, then that's delusion. When the things of the world come forth and confirm themselves and confirm you, that's being awake, right? So that is the other part, right? but I think what you'll find is in that self-receiving, the bonus is this kind of appreciation and delight, this enjoyment of the actual activity of being human, even when the actual activity of being human is difficult, right? Nonetheless. But yes, absolutely. There's, it's the work of a lifetime, and there's always more to it. So, yeah.
So it sounds like the delight of discovering, I don't want to say no self, it's more than that. It's like the discovering the everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Self
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
self quote.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. When Dogen says to study the way is to study the self, hiding in that is the assertion that there's no boundary, no discernible boundary between self and everything. Right. That's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, of course. Good question. Anyone else? Go ahead.
I have a broader question about how Zen thinks about things, which is like in other types of Buddhism, I've heard a lot about like the fruitional view versus like the gradual view.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there's some types of like, maybe like later Buddhism or like Hinduism where you like sit down and you take the view that you're like already enlightened.
Mm-hmm.
And there are even people who will just like make fun of you for meditating because like you're already enlightened. Like, what are you even doing?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering how Zen thinks about like the you're already there perspective versus the like there's somewhere to go, there's something to strive for.
Yeah, it's a really great question, and let's be clear, the Zen School contains people that lean way over into the gradual and people that lean way over into the sudden, right? Yeah. But you'll notice how Dogen addresses it. He says, this inconceivable dharma is abundant in each person, but it's not actualized without practice, right? And what he means specifically about that is that the actualization of it is the practice. It's easy to see that everybody is an enlightened Buddha already, but this is actually according to the Mahayana schools, this is what the Buddha said when he first woke up. He says, "Look, everybody's a Buddha, but because of their preoccupations, they don't recognize it, right?" And so that's kind of the way the Zen school, particularly under Dogen, feels about it, right? Yeah. In terms of sudden and gradual, like I always thought that was a non-debate, and interestingly, a lot, even the people that are credited with starting up that debate in the Zen school in kind of the, I don't know, Tangs, but more in the Song Dynasty, right? They actually got along fine. Right? It wasn't really a problem. But my metaphor for that is, so are earthquakes sudden or gradual, right? They're obviously both, right? They're the whole life of the planet is one long earthquake, but every now and again something in particular happens, right? And that, I think that's what happens in a life of practice as well. You have this tectonic shifting going on, and it every now and again manifests as surprising experience, right? That demonstrates directly the ways in which your assumptions about what it was to be human, what it is to be human, are limiting and misguided. Something like that. Yeah. And I guess the last thing I'd say about that is that one of the primary reasons why people kind of argue about this is that it's really obvious that nobody would do this stuff if they didn't have spiritual ambition, right?
Mhm.
And spiritual ambition is a real burden. And so you have to work with that if you're going to benefit from practice, right? And one way of addressing that is people like homeless Kodo Sawaki, who says, Zazen is good for nothing. And he doesn't even mean it as a joke. He means it seriously, right? And it's a good way to talk about it. But in the end, something happens. So, any more questions? Go ahead.
How do you respond to people who are doing it only to relieve suffering?
Well, I think people need all the help they can get to relieve suffering. I think that's good. I think what I hope for people who do Zen practice is that they learn that their experience, at least it potentially can go way beyond any of the ideas they thought about how it was going to work or what they were going to get out of it. That's kind of what I hope. But yeah, I mean, who doesn't want to be free from suffering, or at least a little free from suffering? And it's on that, like, one of the problems with the early Buddhist texts is that they don't provide a particularly exact or comprehensive definition of what it means to be free from suffering. And it's easy to make the mistake of thinking that means that you'll never suffer again in your entire life, right? Which is just completely not what it means. It means, and like that. There's a great book by, does anyone know who Darlene Cohen is? She was a Zen student with a little bit with Suzuki Roshi, but also early Tassajara and all that sort of thing. And she got married and had a kid and was a Zen priest and all the rest of that sort of thing. And then one morning she woke up and she had rheumatoid arthritis. And she was in excruciating pain for the entire rest of her life. And then, in addition, died of cancer, right? And she wrote a book about her experience with rheumatoid arthritis. And it's fascinating, right? She says, so she has these exercises or thought experiments, right? And she's like, okay, now put the book down, and before you do it, read the sentence. and what I'm going to tell you to do is notice everything you can possibly notice, and then pick the book up in a little bit, and then so you notice everything you can possibly notice, and then you pick the book up, and she says that clearly wasn't enough. and she, so she takes this kind of Jiju Zanmai as a gateway to freedom from this really considerable suffering that arises when your body is essentially having a massive autoimmune reaction all the time, and your joints are getting more and more painful and swelling up and so on and so forth. And then she says, there's kind of a hierarchy of that sort of thing. Sometimes the suffering arises and you're just like, and you're full of at least gratitude and appreciation, right? And then sometimes you have to be close to and sort of go along in the dark with the suffering mind, right? And that is also practice and realization in its essence, right? And then she says, and sometimes really all you can do is sit around and watch bad TV, right? And that's good too. When you're dealing with something as difficult as that. Yeah, it's an eloquent book, and it shows the ways that freedom from suffering is available, and that maybe what you hoped freedom from suffering meant is not exactly what it means. Or at least I think for her, what she hoped was, it turns out, it was way more kind of both satisfactory and sophisticated than she thought, basically. Well, we have about 2 minutes, so it was really wonderful talking with you. Thank you. Yeah. I wanted to know what a stop sounded like on this bell. It sounds good, actually.
Do you want me to stop?
Hmm?
What do you mean stop?
So there's this thing that you do where you go like, it's and let me see. That's better. But there it is. You're supposed to it recognizes that these bells have like a wide range of harmonics, and you're supposed to damp as many of them as you possibly can.
Yeah.
Right? And like when you're doing a city center, you're doing it on a bell this big around and that big, right? And it's really hard to get right. It's an amazing instrument. It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
And they have these. There's a art to building in beat frequencies to the bell,
Oh, cool.
so you ring it, and then underlying this huge pure tone, there's also this sort of like a thing that sort of is tuned to sort of be about the same rhythm as the chanting that people do.
Oh,
and
that's
stuff
so
like that.
cool.
It's very cool. Yeah,
Oh,
it's really,
wow.
really good. Yeah, they're beautiful.
That's some cool engineering.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all done with, like just mixing in weird shit, cooling it in various ways. Are you familiar with the whole Damascus steel thing?
No.
So this is a slightly different deal.
Oh, that can stay.
Hmm?
Chandra will use that tomorrow.
Okay, but there was this. Oh yeah, there was this steel that was being used for weapons and other things, and that came out of